Hello, everybody. I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me my favorite partner in crime, Carolyn Baker. Carolyn is quite simply one of the most heroic witnesses that we have to the terrible process of devastation and rebirth that we are in. I first met Carolyn when I read her absolutely extraordinary book, Sacred Demise, 10 years ago. And I can remember the afternoon in Oak Park when I sat in my chair with the light streaming through, reading this scorching, clear, sober, unarguable book about the crisis we are in. I cannot describe what I felt, but I'll try. I felt at last I had met a true soul sister in the American spiritual scene. I'd been in that scene for a long time, and I'd grown totally despairing of meeting anyone apart from Carolyn Mace and Marianne who didn't indulge in idiotic happy talk while everything is burning. And I felt so lonely and so alienated and so inwardly turbulent with outrage that when I read Carolyn's incisive, pure, ice cold but ice clear words, I realized, oh my God, there's someone else who's prepared to risk her life, her reputation, and tell the truth. Since that time, I've become an extremely close friend of Carolyn's because what happened was is that I rushed to the phone, found out her telephone number, and rang her and raved on about the book. I think she was driving somewhere, so it was a wild conversation. And since then, we've become the dearest of friends and written 3 books ourselves and are just finishing our quartet with a book that's going to be called Radical Regeneration. And your friendship, Carolyn, means everything to me. And it's been one of the great, great thrills of my life to work with another no BS elder, another gay elder, to bring the message of radical regeneration to the planet. I'm so happy that we're doing this today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I am deeply grateful to you and so grateful that on that day you reached out to me by phone. I was on Interstate 80 driving out here to Boulder, Colorado, where I now live, to do a workshop. And when I heard you, I realized this is going to go on for a while. So I pulled off at a rest stop, and an hour and a half later, we finished our conversation.
Wow.
And since then, we have done nothing but make radical mischief, and I've loved every minute of it.
I think one of the things that joins us most deeply is that we're both gay. We both had a very turbulent journey towards accepting our gayness. We both were initiated by that journey into the depths of hypocrisy and corruption in our culture, and we've both been immensely strengthened by the difficulties we encountered on our journey to self-acceptance, strengthened in such a way that it's empowered us to stand and tell the truth from the depth of our being, come what may. And I would love to ask you to share with us what I know has been a long, weird, wild, painful journey, because it's so important that especially the young hear what this journey has been like for the elders who made it possible. Thank God and praise God for the young to have the freedom that they now have. So please plunge in and tell us your story.
Well, thank you. I was born in 1945, right at the end of World War II. And I was born into a Bible-thumping fundamentalist Christian family in northern Indiana. And I was the only child. Today, I understand, as I look back on my parents' childhood, their upbringing, their abuse, I understand why they gravitated to that particular religion and why it became literally their drug of choice. as far as helping them get through life. And early on, I realized that there was something different about me. You know, most gay and lesbian people say that all the time. I just realized there was something different about me. And I realized pretty quickly that I did not want to have the role that my mother had, which was to be a homemaker, stay home all day. You know, my dad going out into the world and working, I just found that really exciting. I didn't want to wear frilly dresses and, you know, nice little patent leather shoes with white stockings. You know, it was just like, oh my God. I wanted to be outdoors in men's clothes, climbing trees, you know, and looking at animals and being with animals. And, you know, I bought into that religion pretty thoroughly by the time that I was in my late teens, because I realized I dare not rebel. I dare not depart. And I had this secret, you know, from the time of puberty, I had this secret that I was attracted to other women. And I had to keep that under wraps because, you know, there was so much talk about the evils of homosexuality and how homosexuals will go to hell and burn, and the Bible condemns it. And I bought into all that. I did a first year of college at a college near my home, and then I went off to Bible college in Chicago, not far from you,
Yes.
actually.
We've been together there, I
Been
remember.
there together, yeah.
Yes.
And you know, and I'm very much in the closet, and just cannot understand why these feelings of attraction to other women are growing so strong. And so I got involved with, in my second year there, I got involved with another woman, and absolutely, you know, was head over heels in love with her, but keeping all this under wraps. And I was terribly disturbed and feeling suicidal. I went to see a Christian psychologist because at that point in my life, I wasn't ready to come out. I was still young. I was 19 or 20. And I needed a professional to tell me that you can change, we can fix this, I can make you normal, blah, blah, blah. Well, long story short, that woman left me, never came back to the Bible college. And in my guilt and shame, I went into the Dean of Women and confessed this horrible sin.
Oh.
And in about 6 weeks, I was kicked out. I knew that if I went home to Indiana with my parents to live with them, which they insisted on, that I would probably kill myself, or that I would be driven crazy. Something in me knew that. And so I insisted that I remain in Chicago, find my own apartment, find my own job, and get on with my life. And I did. I was able to fight them enough to be able to do that. Well, then, you know, about a year later, I fell in love with another woman, and I'm still trying to stay in the closet with this, still trying to please my parents. And then I went off to Michigan State University, where I graduated in 1970, but, you know, fell in love with another woman and tried to remain in the closet. And then in 71, I moved back to Chicago. And this was right in the throes of the women's liberation movement.
Wow.
And there was something that was part of the women's liberation movement called radical lesbians. And I discovered in one of those newspapers you buy on the street that they were having these regular meetings not far from University of Chicago.
Right.
And so in 1971, probably, yeah, early 71, I decided I was going to go to one of these meetings. And, you know, it was interesting just finding out the address of this place. You know, there was like this network, and, you know, you had to like tell them certain things in order to get the address because they were afraid of getting busted and raided and so forth. So I passed the test and found the address, which was near University of Chicago. And on one of those inexplicably cold winter Chicago nights, I found this address, which was in the basement. It was a basement apartment. And I stood outside in the shivering cold and I thought, oh my God, I'm going in to this group of lesbians and it's a dark cellar and oh my God, what's going to happen? But I went in there in my fear, shaking in my boots, and met all these other gay women, many of them Black, and just was completely received. I was held in unconditional love, and I felt like I had found my home. And then after that, we went to a gay bar not far from the Bible college. And nothing was ever the same. That was my story of coming out. Now, I had a turbulent time after that with my parents, and, things were not easy. But at least I came home to my own identity and stopped pretending, which was absolutely fabulous. And, in those days, it was a very big deal. Nothing like today where you can just, in some homes, just announce to your parents, well, I think I'm gay. And they say, oh, well, that's fine. We're proud of you. Anyway, we love you. This was a very different world at that time.
Well, and finding your identity as a gay woman drove you to extricate yourself from the lunacy of fundamentalist Christianity. And that too was a huge struggle, wasn't it?
It was an enormous struggle. I went to the university and, of course, could no longer buy into the fundamentalist aspect of Christianity. So I went down a kind of scholarly theological road. I'm not going to be one of those screaming fundamentalists. I'm going to be, an intellectual Presbyterian. And, and then I went through an atheist phase. And then I went through a psychedelic phase where I was, taking LSD, which was a great thing that actually happened to me because it expanded my awareness.
Right.
And, and it was during the time I was an atheist. And it was like after that experience.
It erupted you out of your atheism.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
described to me those
Absolutely.
visions that you had.
Couldn't possibly be an atheist after that. And then I just went on a long, journey of exploration. I, was involved with the New Age for a while, and, because that was so welcoming. What could be more welcoming than somebody telling you that you're perfect in every way, nothing is wrong with you, and that what you're seeing isn't real, and blah-de-blah, on and on. And then I just started a long search, reading different authors, investigating different paths, and never put a label on it. But it certainly put me in a pitched battle with my parents for all of my adult life. And today, my mother passed in 1985, but today my father is sharp as a tack, 102 years old, living in a nursing home. I talk with him every other day.
And still expecting Jesus to arrive any moment.
Yes, and still expecting to convert me. And so, when the conversation goes in that direction, I change the subject, or I tell him, this is not fair game to talk about. We're not going to talk about this. And then we divert to something else.
You're speaking about it very sanely, but actually that was a horrifying journey for you, wasn't it?
Oh, it was absolutely horrifying.
Deep neurosis of your mother, and to accept that your father would never really accept you as a lesbian, although he admires you and clearly loves you. Right. There would always be this part of him that is somewhere thinking you are going to burn in hell.
Exactly.
And his duty is to do everything possible to convert you as long as he has breath. Absolutely. That's taken so much courage to be able to accept as a reality you can't change.
Yeah, and I still have trouble with it. I have to be honest, you know, I haven't totally accepted it. I've certainly accepted it to a very large degree and lowered my expectations of ever having anything like a normal relationship with him. But, you know, and there are also aspects of this horrible journey that I'm now grateful for.
The
Uh,
hymns, the hymns, you love the hymns.
Yes, I love the hymns. You know, sometimes they go through my head uncontrollably and I can't stop them. And then I just kind of go with them and yeah, okay, they're beautiful in their own way. That was part of my childhood. Now let's listen to Beethoven and you know get this crap out of my head. Um, but you know, it's been a long struggle. And one of the most important parts of my life was in 1986 when I met a Jungian therapist who was also a lesbian and spent 11 years
Wow.
working in depth on my psyche with her and healing many of those wounds that I acquired in childhood. And that made all the difference in my life.
Let's go back to that. But before we go into that and the wonderfully rich spiritual path that has flowered from that, let me ask you a question directly. Don't you think, looking back now, that it was a kind of savage blessing to be lesbian because it forced you to see the underbelly of society? It forced you to realize that many of the things and institutions and dogmas and religions that are out there are really man-made and deeply patriarchal. It bitch slapped you awake to the reality of complex, multi-layered oppression on every level in our culture, and it made you the rebel you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, early on, I could see, I wouldn't let myself fully see, but I could see to some extent the hypocrisy in my own family and the terrible contradictions. And then, of course, as I went to college and I learned more and I got a good intellectual founding, you know, to stand on, it was like, oh my God. And then, of course, I was very involved in the student movements of the 60s, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. And, you know, then I saw all of the contradictions that were going on in the world. And I remained an activist, you know, to this day. And being a lesbian and being in this culture that says one thing and does another and tells me that what I'm seeing, I'm not really seeing, really helped with being an activist and with, you know, getting a life and getting a satisfying life, which I have.
Strength in a way that you needed to really come out and go out of the evangelical
Yes,
church was
absolutely.
the strength that you've based your whole life on and that radiates in your work. You
Yes.
had to forge it young under immense pressure like I did. But oh my God, I am so grateful for myself that I did it. And I know that you are, because without that fundamental strength, without that knowledge that you can stand up, that you can be alone, that you can go through storm after storm of suffering and emerge stronger, you would never have been able to write the amazing books you have. You would have never been able to be one of the most important pioneers of the new consciousness as you've become, and you wouldn't command the respect of all the real, authentic, sacred activists on the planet, because they recognize that your strength has been forged in misery and pain and in profound choice of your own true self.
That is so, yes. And I am just very grateful for all of the circumstances in life that helped me take a stand in my work and endure a lot of years when, you know, 13 years ago, I started writing about the collapse of industrial civilization. in that original book that you first picked up, Sacred Demise. And, it was more successful than I thought it would be, but so many people just called me, Debbie Downer. Oh my God, what a negative person you are. And how can you possibly believe that this civilization is going to collapse? And I continued to write books and speak and teach, do workshops, and produce a daily news digest for the last 12 years that covers all of that. And today, I'm looking at what has happened with the pandemic, what is happening with the economic collapse we're seeing in our country, with the explosion of the racial shadow, the shadow of racism, which has infected us, the disease of racism that's infected us for more than 400 years. I'm looking at that and I'm saying, when all of this really hit the fan, I'm going, wow, I've been writing about this for 13 years and it's really happening.
You know what I think has happened and what is so amazing about your life is that if we go back to that 11 years of Jungian therapy, we see you really forging a strength that's able to hold the opposites, as so few American writers are able to do. Most Americans and most corporate so-called visionaries are so addicted to happy talk, to what they imagine to be optimism and hope, that they will not look at the dark. And yet you and I know that the greatest hope, the most rugged hope, the most inspiring hope, the most emboldening hope is only born at the other end of the despair that arises from truly facing where we are. So before we go into the vision that has truly dominated your life and which you're giving in ever richer ways, let's go back to the period after the Jungian analysis when you truly plunged into shamanism with Malidoma Somé, and when you really discovered the essential importance of not only confronting and integrating the shadow, but of returning to indigenous wisdom, really grounding your whole being in indigenous wisdom. Because to me, the nobility that you showed in overcoming everything you had to overcome to be gay, the nobility you showed by enduring the rigors of a real Jungian analysis, is earthed and grounded in what you discovered in the indigenous system, in the indigenous wisdom, which brought together everything that you'd experienced in the spiritual world and gave you the solidity that you have and have had ever since I've known you.
Yeah, so while I was in Jungian therapy, I was drawn mysteriously, to the Southwest. Well, I traveled with my parents in the Southwest when I was a little kid, and then there just came over me this sense of, I have to go to the Southwest for a trip. And so in 1989, I had full intention of going to the Navajo reservation and just exploring and hanging out there. And I ended up on the Hopi reservation and began just synchronistically to have all these connections with Hopi people. I didn't seek them out. They just came to me. And so I spent 5 years going back maybe 3 or 4 times a year from Northern California to the Hopi reservation, and getting deeply involved with the culture and, as this white person on the outside looking in, but also being welcomed and bringing this back to my therapy sessions and integrating it. And then I met in Northern California, I met Malidoma Somé and his then wife, Suvanfu Somé. And I had this wonderful privilege of doing some workshops and grief rituals with them, big grief rituals outdoors on the land. Then I met Michael Mead, who's this incredible mythologist and storyteller, who mentored me in many ways. I learned African drumming so that I started telling stories with the drum. And I had the opportunity to connect with a lot of men who were doing men's work. And as a lesbian, you know, this might seem really strange, but this androgynous part of me really identified with them and felt a deep kinship with them. And, you know, I just really, because the men's work really helped heal the masculine part of me in many ways. And the feminine in me began to blossom and come forth. And I began more and more to integrate those. And I still struggle to integrate, as we all do. But I'm so grateful for those opportunities with indigenous cultures to be blessed and healed by that wisdom.
Don't you think that one of the roles of the authentic gay elder is to model that sacred androgyny you're talking about? To
Absolutely.
really risk everything
Absolutely.
to carry that mysterious union of masculine and feminine into the culture so that straight people who are also on that journey, everyone's on that journey of integration, can draw inspiration from us. One
Well,
of the things I love about you is that you've never been one of those gay people who believe they're superior to straight people. I never have myself. We've suffered more and we've been forced to go on a deeper, sometimes deeper journey that is very painful. And we know things as gay people that not many straight people know necessarily. But that doesn't mean that we feel in any way superior to straight people. We want to be part of the human family, to be given our true voice, to be respected for what we carry, and to back to straight people the integration of the opposites that they're seeking in their own wonderful, holy way. And what do you feel about this androgyny that you have? What does it seem to you at this moment to give you?
well, I think it's an incredible bridge. Let me tell you a little bit about what Malidoma and Sobonfu told us about their culture. In the Dagara culture of Burkina Faso, West Africa, um, gay people are seen as gatekeepers. They keep the door from the other world.
Mhm.
They're revered as people who can keep that door from the other world to this world and sort of guard it and open it. And so in their tribe, um, when men and women are having conflicts, you know, the women will meet over here and discuss it. The men will meet over here and discuss it. And oftentimes, you know, in the women's group, there's a lesbian or two. And so the women will say, why don't you go talk to the men and see if you can help resolve this? And so they do. And the lesbians help resolve the conflict the women are having with the men. And likewise, in the men's group, if they're having a conflict with the women, they might say to the gay men, why don't you go talk to those women or go talk to the lesbians? Because, you know, I think they would understand you better. And so gay people in that culture help resolve the conflicts between straight people.
And this is one of the ways in which your experience of indigenous wisdom added to your healing.
Yes.
I've never forgotten meeting a great Native American healer who described to me what happened in his tribe. And it went like this. Whenever a warrior was wounded in battle, he would first be tended and brought back to health, not by his wife, but by his male lover, who would restore by his adoration and tenderness his masculinity. And then the wingti, they called him in Native American culture, would return him to his wife, who totally embraced the wingti as part of the ecology of love. And that blew my brains out, because in my own life, I'd had so many straight men whom I'd become very close to, who really wanted to love me and love my friendship, and who really needed my help so many times with their girlfriends. And I've had a whole slew of amazing women who've confided in me and whom I've been able to help with their lovers. And here was this archetypal structure being revealed to me as the same way of being that a real culture would recognize that gay people are capable of, and not only capable of, but made of. And then I plunged into a deep research. And in fact, of course, I found that all mother cultures, almost without exception, honored gay people as gatekeepers, as priests, as mystics, as beings who, because they merged the opposites, reflected the dance of opposites that is reality, and so have a particular gift for interpreting eternal reality in time. And that explains so much to me of why I've done the work I've done. And knowing that you've been on that journey explains to me so much of the marriage of opposites in your work, your marriage of profound compassion, profound molten outrage at injustice, profound understanding of the suffering of the oppressed, profound love of nature and of animals, all the great gifts of the sacred feminine, with this absolutely passionate commitment to sobriety, to rigor, to clear thought, to clear down-home presentation of real messages, so that everyone with half a mind and half a heart can get it. And in your work, that fusion of opposites reflects this journey towards accepting your gayness and integrating your wounded feminine with your wounded masculine through psychology, and then finding a place for this integration within the larger sacred context given by indigenous culture that empowered you at another level to stand up to do the great work for which you have been called and which you have done with such unexampled truth. There's no one I know, Carolyn, who has risked her soul, her psyche, her livelihood, her capacity to engender fame and be received as you have, because you've managed to make that union within yourself and stand by what you know. So look, let's go back to the experience of your evangelical Christian background, because to me it's a key. And the reason why it's a key is that Sinclair Lewis quote that American fascism will emerge draped in a flag and clutching a crucifix. And what we're seeing right now, you and I talk about this every single morning, because as we've been doing this book, we've been having the wildest and happiest and most ferocious conversations, I think, to keep us sane and on point, because that's the thing that gay elders can do so marvelously for each other, and we do it for each other. Yeah. And we're both aware, as we've written about in Savage Grace, that the tremendous danger that is before our world is the birth of an unparalleledly powerful, unparalleledly devastating fascism, which in America is symbolized by Trump, and yesterday was incarnated when Trump stood before St. John's Church in Washington, clutching a Bible, after having announced that he is utterly prepared to bring in the military to shoot fellow Americans, which only can mean to anyone with half a brain that he is planning to bring in martial law, ban the elections, and seize power. This is a dictatorial move, and everyone we respect knows this. And it's time that America knows this. So I think that your experience of spiritual fascism of evangelical Christianity, which is deranged and ugly and unbelievably destructive and unbelievably cruel, both to straight people and gay people, because it deforms everything, gave you a deep X-ray into the fascism that has been building in American society for decades now. In fact, ever since the beginning of the inception of America, it was its secret temptation. And I would love you to speak about your vision of American history, because you taught American history for a very long time, and your vision in as clear a way as possible of how this history, this amazing but devastating history, has provided the most fertile seedbed for the birth, the monstrous birth that we're now potentially witnessing, and which we must do everything to prevent.
Well, back in 2006, shortly before I wrote my autobiography, and I do want to tell people about my autobiography.
It's a fantastic book.
Coming out from fundamentalist Christianity, which I tell my story completely. I wrote another book right before this one called American History, U.S. History Uncensored. I'm sorry, U.S. History Uncensored, What Your High School Textbook Didn't Tell You. And so I would go more deeply into the dark side of American history, with slavery, with, you know, the murder, the genocide of millions of Native Americans and so on.
And millions of buffaloes, the genocide of nature.
Yes, the genocide of nature.
Triple genocides, yes.
Absolutely. But being raised in a fundamentalist Christian family, I don't think there's a better template for how fascism works. It's very authoritarian, it's very fascistic, very hierarchical. And you would think, you know, I'm a little
and very
kid,
male dominated.
and extremely male dominated. And you would think, little kid in the 1950s, you know, you would think, well, by the year 2020, that will have changed. No, it's worse. And so as I look now at Liberty University and Jerry Falwell Jr., as I look at, you know, Robert Jeffers and some of these other religious minions that surround Donald Trump.
And as you look at the demonic alliance that Trump cynically has struck with the evangelicals, who proclaim him as the agent of God in the name of Jesus.
Absolutely. So as you see this, you know, it's like, well, it has changed since the 50s. It's gotten much worse. And it is now, there is no hiding it. It's, you know, you can't look at Donald Trump and say, well, the fundamentalists like him because he's a fundamentalist, or he's a born-again Christian, or he loves Jesus, or whatever. There are two things, and two things only, that they care about: abortion and homosexuality.
And getting judges in the Supreme Court. Don't miss that one.
Well, of course, but that's related to abortion and homosexuality. Bottom line, you know, I mean, Trump could be almost any religion in the world, and it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter if he spat on a picture of Jesus. They would love him because he opposes homosexuality and abortion. And so, you know, it is an evil beyond anything, and it's so compatible with fascism. Christo-fascism. Christo-fascism. American Theocracy, a guy named Kevin Phillips, a wonderful historian, back during the George W. Bush administration, wrote a wonderful book about this, American Theocracy. I highly recommend it.
It goes beyond even that also, as you know, because there wouldn't be such openness to this kind of authoritarianism had there not been a prolonged orgy of greed. Right. And a prolonged addiction to domination over nature, and a prolonged immersion in the kind of terminal narcissism that we both talk a great deal about, right, and which possesses this culture like an evil spirit. And I would love you to address that narcissism, because it is one of the central themes of your work. And one of the central functions, it seems to me, of a gay elder that has suffered so much from the unconscious, entitled narcissism of various dogmatic approaches to sexuality, is to be able to note narcissism in all of its manifestations and point to it and say, don't indulge in this, it's lethal. It will destroy your soul and make you a slave of the death machine. That's one of the great messages of your work.
Well, historically, I look back and it has its roots even earlier. But I think we reached a watershed in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan.
Absolutely.
And he says, it's morning in America. Government is the problem. We don't need to look after each other anymore. We don't need to have a sense of the commons. We just need to make sure that the rich prosper. Oh, you're having problems with poverty? Well, that's your problem. That's your fault, And so social programs were destroyed. The doors of mental hospitals were opened, and mental health, was like out the window. And you're on the streets now. Too bad, so sad, not my problem. And so there was this whole...
and an orgy of destroying nature was allowed, because the environment gets in the way of your corporate scheme. So that too has to be ignored. It's a complete banishing of the feminine in favor of the psychotic masculine, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we had, 8 years of that, followed by, then folks who wanted to initiate regime change, and it's all based on all of this. From Reagan onward is based on narcissism. We're the best. We're superior. We're going to, once again, go around the world and shove democracy down people's throats, which is always the most undemocratic thing you can do.
Yes.
And the whole culture became about greed and feeding the ego and destroying nature and giving me what I want. And so the culmination of this was to elect, but I use the word air quotes around it, elect the most narcissistic president we've ever had in the history of the world. And I use the air quotes because as far as the popular vote, he didn't win the popular vote, and he could have not been elected without assistance from Russia. And so, here we are in a sewer of greed and narcissism.
And agony now. And agony, because
agony.
Narcissism depends upon, for its strength, a total ignorance of the shadow of the history that created it.
Absolutely.
Because in its fundamental nature, it's immensely insecure and paranoid, because it has to forget the horrors of slavery. It has to turn away from the genocide of the Native Americans. It has to turn away from the appalling treatment of wave after wave of immigration in the name of Lady Liberty. It has to turn away from the despoliation of nature. It has to constantly suppress its own feminine impulses of compassion, so it ends up serving soullessness and the most sterile imaginable vision of power.
Right. Yeah, the more the narcissism, the less there is conscience.
Exactly.
Right? And so
now you're leading to something that I really want to talk about with you,
okay,
because this is something we talk about a lot. One of the really desperately depressing sides of this crisis, and we'll get to the hope in a second, one of the desperately depressing sides of this crisis is the New Age movement that mirrors the denial and narcissism and entitlement of corporate culture, which is, of course, why corporate culture has so glorified it and sold the hell out of it, because as long as all you're concentrated on is your own navel, as long as you won't look at the dark, because that's supposedly to feed the dark rather than to address the agony of the dark and bring healing and justice to the dark, as long as every social, political, economic, radical feeling is banished from your endless self-absorption, your spirituality doesn't pose any threat to the continuing despoliation of the earth. And you and I know that that is not that alliance is an alliance that is conscious. They know that by keeping a great proportion of the spiritual world supine and blissed out on inauthentic bliss, they're going to have no opposition to what they continue to unfold. And when I created and laid out sacred activism, it was in an act of molten rebellion against that fantasy which has rotted and polluted the minds and souls of millions of Americans. And when I really got to know you, I realized that you'd been on a serious spiritual journey which had equipped you to hold the opposites, and which had equipped you to be able to stand looking at the dark, not because you're a depressive, not because you're paralyzed by despair, not because you're a Debbie Downer, but because you're someone who knows that if we don't look at the dark, if we don't address the dark, if we don't become strong enough to face the dark, even when it's overwhelmingly dark, we will never be graced by spirit. Any sane or vibrant solutions to the now appalling problems that are hurtling down on us from all sides. So I would love you to really address the critique of yourself as a doom merchant, because my experience of you and your work has been exactly the opposite. You're one of the very few people who are inviting us to face the dark, but not out of any desire to rub us into the dark, but in a desire to help us liberate ourselves from unconscious darkness in ourselves and in our world that perpetuates the dark's rape of the world and potential destruction of the world. That's my language, but I want you to really speak to everyone now and put that fantasy of you being a Debbie Downer to rest, because you're the most positive person I know.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I remember about 4 years ago when you and I were sitting somewhere, maybe over dinner, and we were talking about people accusing us of being darkness junkies. And I said, Andrew, we should write a book on joy.
Yes,
And so
because we have a lot of joy in our lives. You and I have more joy than is legal. Yes.
absolutely. And so we wrote Return to Joy.
Right.
And what we talked about in that book, we distinguished very clearly between joy and happiness. The happiness is circumstantial, comes and goes, depends on what's going on around me. Joy is something I have at my core that I can rely on, I can reach into. And we use Viktor Frankl as a moral model of that.
Totally.
And how joy got him through Auschwitz and kept him sane among the madness that he was going through. And so, it's like I'm a very passionate, joyful person. I don't sit around contemplating the dark all the time. I was always, even in the midst of this fascist family and all the hypocrisy that I saw going on, I wanted to be outside and play and be with the animals and play cowboys and, just be a free spirit and be in my body. And I'm still that same person today. There's a part of me that
You're
is,
not that, you're more that same person because you haven't been destroyed by what you know of the dark. And your work is not about depressing people, it's about warning and alerting people to what is on the horizon, staring at us, so that we can galvanize our deepest inner resources and have a ghost of a chance to organize a systematic structural rebellion.
yeah. And so we do that through joy. We
Yes.
do that through joy even when we're not happy. We do it, and we get that joy from connecting with other people, with animals, with nature, with art and music and beautiful storytelling. And, all of the things that rejuvenate our soul. And that's not narcissistic, because we're holding all these truths at the same time. We're holding the horror that is happening around us in our country and our world alongside the fun and play and creativity and refreshment that we get in this world. There's so much beauty to experience and savor ourselves in. I was thinking yesterday, one of the saddest things about when I think of coming to Chicago to visit you, which I'm not going to do anytime soon, but one of the saddest things I thought about is the symphony is gone.
I know, our church.
The symphony, our church, our temple is gone, for now. And I pray that someday we might be able to experience it together again.
That's why I sent you Marla's Resurrection through the
Yes,
post, because I felt if I can't take you to the symphony and we can't celebrate the gorgeous tradition that gives us so much inspiration and courage and energy,
yeah,
then we can at least listen to it.
right. And
Right.
you and I, we sit down and we write these books on the darkness and the shadow, and then we go play. We go to the
Yes.
symphony or the opera. We have dinner. We go see a movie.
But the truth is that all the books that we've written have not been just on the darkness and the shadow, because when we finished Return to Joy, we plunged into really our fiercest book, Savage Grace.
Right.
But in really outlining where we are, we made sure in Savage Grace that we pointed to the savage grace. And the savage grace is authenticity of being, really stepping up to be a sacred activist and therefore discovering the truest meaning of your mission. And this is the real diamond that Carly is handing out to everybody, the ecstasy of connecting with your deathless self, that not even the death of everything could possibly ever destroy. And you know that deathless self, and I know that deathless self, and we both know that part of the horrible gift of being born potentially at the end of things, in the middle of the writhing throes of an extinction crisis, is that if you can stand to have your illusions shattered, you won't be rewarded with paralysis, you will be rewarded with the taste of what lives in you beyond illusion. And what lives in every single human being beyond illusion is nothing less than the divine self. And this is the absolute witness and conclusion and honor that is at the heart of all of the mystical traditions. And this is the real meaning of our evolutionary journey, that we have to give up all the illusions about our powers and come through an experience of the dark night into a living experience of our deathlessness, and then come together and get going and do everything we can to try and build a new world. But without that journey being as severe as it is, has to be, you'll never discover what lives inside you and its deathless, passionate, wild, holy, serene joy. And you'll never be flooded with the energy of compassionate passion and passionate compassion that comes from that. And you'll never be able to stand up in a world that's burning and keep going without any wavering. So we know what it takes to forge a true midwife warrior in this time. And I am sick of people saying to me that you're a doom merchant and I'm a doom merchant, when we both know that what we've discovered in the depths of our life is a flaming purpose, a passionate mission, and endless supplies of energy and joy to get that mission out there. And this is why I think the message that you and I in different ways have been given for so long is now really reaching people. Everything has changed since Trump came to power in my work, because people who marginalized me for 20 years realized that I'd been telling the truth. Same for you. And that's why we wrote Divine Animals, because we meet in the greatest joy of all, our love for animals. So speak of that joy and what Sammy means to you. And I'll put in a bit about Jade, because otherwise she'll get jealous and my life will be intolerable.
I want to address that, and then I want to, perhaps you're going to ask me something about the younger generation.
Yes.
Because that's important as well. I just want to put a placeholder on that.
Absolutely. That's what I want to ask you last, after you speak about the animals, and I want you to talk directly to the younger generation.
Well, I'm thrilled that after we wrote Savage Grace, we both said we've got to write something about animals and the importance of animals in our world and in our lives. And so we wrote Saving Animals from Ourselves and
releasing the divine animal within, right?
Yeah, and the focus was the divine animal within. It wasn't a litany of horror stories about animal abuse. It was about this divine animal that lives within us. And of course, we were both facilitated by our favorite animal friends, part of our family, me, Sammy, and you with Jade. And Sammy has been a companion of mine for about 12 years. I've been telling people I can't hug humans right now with the pandemic, but I've been hugging Sammy more than I've ever hugged him. And he's a fairly big animal. So, to have that big, warm body against me has just been so healing and so inspiring through this time. And he lays at my chair when I write. He's right there under me.
Such a beautiful creature.
And he's a beautiful creature. And when he's not laying under my chair, he's looking out the window of my office and dreaming of chasing cats and squirrels and whatever.
I think it took two gay elders to write that book for this reason. We both went through so much suffering to release our own divine animal, to bless our bodies, to bless our sexuality, that we recognized that the wound is the way in which the body and sexuality have been so demonized and suppressed, with the most disastrous results, because it's made us killers of animals. We can't stand the beauty and the naturalness and the richness of their divine animal, because we have created a whole culture which is a kind of concentration camp for our divine animal. And because as gay elders, we got out of that concentration camp and stood in the center of our sacred sexuality and said, whatever you think of me, and I don't care anymore, because I know that my sexuality is divine and my powers of love are divine. And I will not let any of you with your dogmas and religions stop me knowing what I know now directly from the source. Because of that, we were able to identify this, which has taken the whole discourse about the killing of animals for many, many people who love this book to a wholly new level. And I'm very proud of that book.
Me too.
Yes. And Jane says hello, and she says that my adoration of her has reached about the right level. It's now become terminal, total, and perpetual, just as the adoration of the host is supposed to be in Carmelite monasteries.
And I'm sure that she has been an enormous comfort to you in the pandemic.
God. She is the reason I do the work I do. She is the reason I get up every morning and do this work, because I want her and all the beautiful holy animals to have an earth in which they'll no longer be terrified of us. And I want human beings to discover what you have discovered, that animals are supreme spiritual guides into radiant embodiment. Because when they do, and so many, of course, of the indigenous peoples know this already, but when we all do, we will realize that this world is Eden. We don't need heaven, we don't need hell. Hell's here, and so is heaven. Let's reorganize our whole world to embrace the great joy that we know at this stage of our life is the reality of life and the reality of our life.
Yes.
So, darling, at the end of this amazing conversation with you, just take a very deep breath and speak out of the whole of your journey to the amazing young people that you and I both are amazed and awed at and delighted at. Speak to them about what it means to be a gay elder and what they need perhaps to really embrace so that their journey can be as complete and as fulfilled as it possibly could be.
I would say to those young folks, because I had the wonderful privilege about 4 or 5 years ago of presenting a workshop at the LGBTQ Center at University of Rhode Island. And I had an opportunity, I was the oldest person in the room, and I had the opportunity to just hang out for a day with young folks who identified themselves in a variety of ways, who were done with the binary definitions of their sexuality. I was able to tell my story, which they couldn't relate to very much, and I was able to just listen to them. It was so valuable to me to just listen to them.
Oh, it's so wonderful.
And, you know, on the one hand, I was just absolutely delighted because so few of them had any problems telling their parents. You know, parents were like, okay, that's great, whatever. And they were in another world with the issues around their sexuality as compared with where I was. And so I just want to say that, first of all, my heart goes out to you economically, because no matter who you are, no matter what family you've come from, you in this generation are going to be facing challenges and suffering that my generation could not have known. My generation is the one that really helped destroy the planet more than any other. And I want to apologize to you. I want to tell you that I'm sorry for what we have left you. And you're going to need a lot of wisdom and stealth and creativity to navigate, you know, when in some senses there's no future economically. You know, when are you going to be able to go to college if that's your choice? And what's that going to look like? And will you be able to get a job afterward? And what's that going to look like?
And what will the culture look like?
And what will the culture look like? So you have to really be your own person. You have to, like the young person who went through initiations in indigenous cultures, reach down inside yourself and find out who you are and who you want to be and how you want to forge your life going forward in this time of unprecedented crisis. And so I would just say to the LGBTQ people who are listening to me that I bless you and I honor you. And I thank you for being there and for your courage to, you know, take on these new identities and throw off these old, you know, constricted ways of looking at human sexuality.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Carolyn, thank you. I'll be ringing you very soon so we can carry on our endless conversation. And I'm so happy to have had this with you. And I'm so happy that everybody listening can meet you as I know you, ablaze, joyful, clear, passionately committed to the possible, impossible future. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.